Yeah, so I'm the Shadow Minister for Asia and Pacific in the Labour Party in the Houses of Parliament here in the UK. And it's my responsibility to speak out on behalf of the Labour Party about the terrible events that are taking place in Hong Kong, to speak out in favour of democracy, the defence of human rights, and the completely unacceptable behaviour of the Chinese government in terms of trying to crush democracy and human rights in Hong Kong, and also violating their own legally binding commitments under the Sino-British Declaration and Hong Kong's Basic Law. I think what it reveals is that the Chinese government is interested only in a complete monopoly of power, and they will even break international law in order to achieve that monopoly of power. The one country, two systems principle is a legally binding one, and it is completely unacceptable that the Chinese government is trying to project its own authoritarian tendencies and policies onto a bastion of freedom and democracy and the rule of law, which is Hong Kong. So we in the Labour Party are calling on the Chinese government to reconsider its actions and to align with its own legally binding commitments. In the United Kingdom over the last 10 years, successive Conservative governments have been profoundly naive and complacent about the way in which they've engaged with China. They had this policy called the Golden Era, and the idea was that we were going to open up our markets to China, and that in return we were going to get China aligning with international norms and standards. The opposite has happened. The Golden Era strategy has been a complete disaster, but I'm afraid that the last vestiges are still clinging on in the UK government. We saw just recently the UK government blocked the attempt to have the genocide amendment to the trade bill based on what the Chinese government is doing to the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. They have not taken action in terms of sanctioning Carrie Lam and other senior Hong Kong executives. British judges are still serving on the Hong Kong Court of Appeal. All of this has to stop. We need to have a reality check in the way in which the United Kingdom and other countries in the international community engage with China, and that requires a much tougher stance, a stance that's based on the principles and the values that we cherish. And I think that the fact is that the Chinese government only respects strength and consistency and is contemptuous of weakness and division. But the West seems to be too divided right now, and we need real leadership on this issue. I hope we'll start to see some of that coming out of the G7 this weekend. We have to work with China on a number of important issues, for example, climate change and dealing with pandemics going forward. But we also have to be ready to compete with China, and we also have to be ready to challenge China. And it has to be a strategy that does all of those three things effectively. And I believe that if you effectively challenge China, you can actually improve the way in which you cooperate with China. The two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they should be feeding off each other. We need a relationship which is based on mutual respect. But we're not going to get that mutual respect if we keep just looking the other way when China is committing these awful violations of international law in Hong Kong, human rights abuses in Xinjiang, and also increasingly belligerent behavior in the South China Sea and towards Taiwan. So the time has come to stand firm on these issues, but of course to be ready to cooperate. And by the way, of course, the issue of the pandemics, we first of all need full and unfettered access for scientists to be able to investigate the origins of COVID-19, because it's only by understanding the true origins of COVID-19 that we will be better prepared to deal with future pandemics. And that's to the benefit of China, just as it is to the rest of the world. So really nobody is benefiting from the current policies of the Chinese government, including the Chinese people themselves. And that's why there's an opportunity, I think, to really have a reset, a fundamental reset. But that does require a robust stance to be taken by the G7 and other democracies.